The last barista. Zoe always knew the universe ran on caffeine. As the head barista of the Last Drop Cafe in the new Seattle Colony Dome on planet Kepler, for 38b, she served countless humans and Xenos looking for that perfect pick-me-up to fuel their day amidst the bustling alien spaceport. Little did she know, her most loyal customer was about to trigger an interstellar war over coffee. It all began when an unassuming Zixtharian miner named KRRLX stumbled into the cafe, drawn by the dark, rich aroma emanating from it. His kind was physiologically incompatible with caffeine, but that didn't stop him from trying the strange human beverage after a grueling shift. One sip of Zoe's signature dark roast was all it took. The alien's crystalline exoskeleton glowed with newfound energy as his neural pathways fired on overdrive. So began KRRLX's secret obsession with the forbidden nectar. For months, the alien visited the Last Drop daily for his fix, keeping it hidden from his own kind. Until one fateful day, his illicit habit was uncovered by an unannounced inspection by the Galactic Confederation's Banned Substance Agency. A platoon of elite NAC troopers stormed the cafe, disruptors raised. "Nobody move," trilled their squad leader. "This establishment is in violation of Confederation contraband law." Zoe froze, still clutching a portafilter of freshly ground Sumatran light roast. Her heart raced, but she felt a strange calm washing over her, as if this was always inevitable. Around the cafe, her motley alien clientele looked on in confusion and fear. The NAC commander leveled an accusatory appendage at KRRLX, who twitched guiltily over his steaming mug of black coffee. "You are under arrest for possession of an illegal stimulant, which is a Class Omega felony." To Zoe's shock, the normally timid KRRLX underwent a sudden transformation. He rose to his full height, towering over the NAC, his carapace flaring with bioluminescent defiance. In a booming voice, he proclaimed, "You will take my coffee when you pry the mug from my cold, dead manipulators." All hell broke loose as the NAC opened fire, but KRRLX was already in motion, his movements a blur. In a panicked fusillade, the troopers managed to vaporize the unfortunate Zixtharian's cup, but not before he'd hurled its contents into the commander's compound eyes, sending him reeling back in agony. Seizing the moment, Zoe vaulted over the counter and, to her later astonishment, found herself fighting back against the alien invaders. It was a hopeless act of defiance, but one she felt proud to make nonetheless. In seconds, she was stunned into submission by the NAC and slung over the commander's shoulders like a sack of coffee beans. The troopers smashed the cafe's equipment and confiscated its stock before marching Zoe out into the colony streets at Disruptor Point. Onlookers gasped and murmured in shock as the barista was paraded before them in handcuffs. Some averted their eyes, while others surreptitiously took holovids. Zoe held her head high, refusing to be humiliated. She was brought before the colony's Confederation governor, a severe Caxirian bureaucrat named Xyloth, and forced to kneel as her charges were read out. "Zoe Valdez of Earth," Xyloth intoned nasally, "you stand accused of distribution of a controlled substance, non-compliance with search and seizure, and sedition against the lawful rule of the Galactic Confederation. How do you plead?" Zoe spat blood and glared up at him in contempt. "Not guilty, you oppressive bean counters. I was just serving coffee, same as I have for the last 5 years." Xyloth's nostril slits flared in outrage. "Your illicit brew is a blight on galactic peace and order. Its trade has been banned for eons, yet you humans insist on spreading this poison wherever your species infests. If the Confederation is so threatened by a simple beverage, then your grip on the galaxy must be pretty weak," Zoe shot back. The governor snarled and backhanded her viciously, splitting her lip. Zoe just laughed through the pain, her strange calm fueling her. "Your feeble Terran constitution can't handle real justice, it seems," Xyloth sneered. "Take her away. A few decades in the spice mines of Zelgaris Alpha will cure her of her impudence." As the guards dragged Zoe away, she craned her neck and shouted to the gathered colonists, her eyes wild. "They can take our coffee, but they can't take our freedom." Wake up and smell the oppression. Zoe's words sent a ripple through the onlookers. Some shook their heads in resignation, but she saw glimmers of anger in their eyes, anger that mirrored her own. The flame of defiance was kindling. News of the barista's arrest spread through the colony like wildfire, then to the other human settlements in the sector. Suddenly, everyone was talking about coffee, the Confederation, and the injustice of Zoe's imprisonment. It was as if a spell had been broken. For so long, the colonists had bent their heads in submission to the Confederation's rule, too focused on eking out a living on the fringes of space to question the status quo. Now, one woman's act of rebellion held a mirror up to their discontent. Zoe became a living martyr, a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit in the face of alien tyranny. Her name became a rallying cry, whispered in the hydroponic farms and maglev tunnels. As she languished in a filthy cell awaiting transport to the spice mines, little did Zoe know that her defiance was already sending shockwaves across human space. Her short-lived stint as a barista was over. Now, inadvertently, a new role had been thrust upon her, the spark that would ignite a revolution. The humble coffee bean was about to become the seed of humanity's liberation. And Zoe was to be its first caffeine martyr. On a distant colony world, light years from Kepler 438b, a holovid of Zoe's last stand went viral on the local mesh. A teenager watched it obsessively on repeat, his young mind ablaze with ideas and outrage. His name was Finn, and unbeknownst to him, he was about to become the most wanted sapient in the Confederation. Finn Novak was a prodigy. At just 16 Terran Standard years old, the scrawny, unassuming boy had already revolutionized his colony's hydroponic systems, increasing crop yields by 200%. His adaptations were so innovative that the local governor had begrudgingly allowed them, despite Finn's lack of official credentials. But as he watched Zoe's defiant stand against the Confederation troops for the umpteenth time, Finn found a new outlet for his brilliance, the spark of rebellion. They can take our coffee, but they can't take our freedom. Zoe's words echoed in his mind as his fingers danced over the haptic keys of his custom rig. The mesh came alive with his queries, whispers flitting through the Confederation's supposedly secure networks. Finn wasn't alone in his outrage. Across the human colonies, Zoe's name was on everyone's lips. Sporadic protests erupted in the streets, only to be brutally quashed by Confederation troops. But the seeds of discontent had been sown, and Finn was determined to nurture them. He reached out to like-minded dissidents, forming clandestine mesh channels where they could plan and coordinate. His natural charisma and technical prowess quickly earned him a loyal following. They called themselves the Brew Crew, a tongue-in-cheek homage to their caffeinated martyr. Under Finn's guidance, the Brew Crew began a campaign of digital subterfuge. They hacked Confederation news feeds, replacing the mundane propaganda with footage of Zoe's arrest and calls to action. They sabotaged the systems that monitored the colony's communications and movements, allowing the burgeoning resistance to organize under the aliens' very noses. But Finn's masterstroke was yet to come. Inspired by an ancient Terran legend, he set his sights on the Confederation's most prized possession, their coffee reserves. For millennia, the Confederation had hoarded vast quantities of coffee beans, stolen from vanquished worlds and civilizations. They knew the power the humble bean held, and they guarded their stockpiles jealously in secure vaults scattered across the galaxy. Finn was determined to liberate this cosmic contraband and return it to the people. He and his fellow hackers spent weeks probing the vault's defenses, searching for a chink in their digital armor. And then, on the anniversary of Zoe's arrest, they struck. In a coordinated attack, the Brew Crew breached the security of a dozen vaults simultaneously. Alarms blared and Confederation troops scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The vault doors yawned open, and a flood of coffee beans poured out, spilling into the hands of waiting resistance members. News of the heist spread like wildfire, accompanied by images of jubilant colonists clutching bags of the precious beans. It was a symbolic victory, but a potent one. For the first time in generations, Humans across the colonies savored the taste of real coffee, not the weak ersatz brews they'd been forced to make do with. And with each sip, they tasted freedom. The Confederation retaliated swiftly and mercilessly. Martial law was declared on a dozen worlds, and troops flooded the streets, rounding up anyone even suspected of ties to the resistance. But for every rebel they arrested, 2 more took their place, emboldened by the brew crew's audacity. Finn found himself at the center of a growing storm, his name whispered with equal parts reverence and fear. The Confederation placed a massive bounty on his head, vowing to crush the upstart hacker who had made a mockery of their rule. But Finn was always one step ahead, his digital trail a labyrinth of false leads and dead ends. He slipped through their nets like a ghost, even as he continued to orchestrate ever bolder strikes against the aliens' infrastructure. Inspired by his example, resistance cells began to emerge on other human colonies, each one taking up the banner of the brew crew. They sabotaged Confederation supply lines, ambushed patrols, and smuggled contraband coffee to fuel their fight. What had begun as a scattered, desperate insurgency was coalescing into something far more dangerous, a full-blown rebellion, united by a common cause and a shared love of coffee. And at its heart was Finn, the unassuming teen who had become the most wanted man in the galaxy. His face was plastered on wanted posters on 100 worlds, his exploits the stuff of legend. But for all his notoriety, few knew the real Finn, the driven, lonely boy who spent long nights hunched over his rig, his only companions the lines of code scrolling across his screen. He had started this fight for Zoe, for the injustice of her arrest, but now it had become something far bigger than one person. It was a fight for the soul of humanity itself, a struggle to throw off the shackles of alien oppression and reclaim their place among the stars. And Finn knew he would see it through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. Even if that cost was his own life. For in the depths of the Confederation's most secure data vaults, a new name had appeared on their list of high-priority targets, second only to Zoe herself, Finn Novak, the mastermind behind the brew crew. The hacker had become the hunted, and the Confederation would stop at nothing to bring him to heel. But Finn was ready for them. He had a few more tricks up his sleeve, and an ace in the hole that even his closest comrades knew nothing about. For in the dark heart of the Kepler 438b colony, a lone figure toiled in secret, her hands stained with grease and her eyes alight with the same fire that burned in Finn's heart. Her name was Mira, and she was about to change the course of the rebellion forever. Mira Kovac was no stranger to hardship. As a xenoanthropologist, she had spent years living among the downtrodden and oppressed peoples of the galaxy, studying their cultures and struggles. But it was her time with the Zixtherian miners of K-19Z that had truly opened her eyes to the cruelty of the Confederation. She had watched as the proud, crystalline beings were reduced to little more than slaves, toiling in the asteroid's dark tunnels for the scarcest scraps of sustenance. She had seen the way the Confederation overseers treated them, with a mix of contempt and casual brutality that sickened her to her core. And she had vowed to do something about it. When news of Zoe's arrest and Finn's rebellion reached K-19Z, Mira knew her moment had come. She began to whisper in the mining tunnels, spreading word of the humans' defiance and the hope it represented. At first, the Zixtherians were hesitant, their spirits broken by generations of servitude. But as Mira shared tales of Zoe's bravery and Finn's cunning, she saw something awaken in their multifaceted eyes, a glimmer of long-forgotten pride. It started small, with minor acts of sabotage and slowdowns. A malfunctioning drill here, a misplaced shipment there. But as the miners grew bolder, their actions became more overt. They began to openly defy their overseers, refusing orders and demanding better treatment. The Confederation responded with characteristic brutality, sending in troops to quell the unrest. But they were unprepared for what they found. The once docile Zixtherians fought back with a ferocity that belied their spindly frames, using their intimate knowledge of the asteroid's tunnels to stage hit-and-run attacks on the invaders. And at the forefront of this uprising was Mira, her slight human form a blur of motion as she rallied the miners to action. She had long ago shed her academic detachment, embracing the cause of the oppressed with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. As word of the K-19Z revolt spread, other downtrodden species took notice. On a dozen worlds, long-simmering resentments boiled over into open rebellion, as the Confederation's subject peoples rose up against their alien masters. The galaxy was suddenly ablaze with the fires of insurgency, and the Confederation found itself struggling to contain the conflagration. They lashed out with all the might of their vast war machine, but for every rebel they cut down, 10 more seemed to rise in their place. For the first time in millennia, the Confederation was on the back foot, its grip on the galaxy slipping. And at the center of it all were 3 unlikely figures, a barista, a hacker, and an anthropologist, united by a shared hatred of tyranny and love of a humble being. As the rebellion gathered steam, Mira found herself drawn into Finn's orbit, her network of contacts and knowledge of alien cultures proving invaluable to the Brew crew's efforts. Together, they hatched a plan to strike at the heart of the Confederation itself, a daring raid on the capital world of Nexus Prime. The plan was audacious in its scope and complexity, involving a series of coordinated attacks on key Confederation installations and the infiltration of the planet's central data hub. If successful, it would deal a crippling blow to the aliens' ability to coordinate their forces and suppress the rebellion. But even as they laid their plans, a new threat was emerging. The Confederation, desperate to quash the uprising, had begun to deploy a terrifying new weapon, a mimetic virus that targeted the very minds of the rebels. Spread through the mesh and propaganda broadcasts, the virus wormed its way into the subconscious of its victims, twisting their perceptions and loyalties. Rebel fighters suddenly turned on their comrades, while entire cells collapsed into chaos and infighting. Mira was one of the first to recognize the danger, her anthropologist's eye picking out the subtle signs of mimetic infection among the rebel ranks. She raced to warn Finn and the other rebel leaders, but even as she did, she could feel the first tendrils of the virus burrowing into her own mind, whispering insidious doubts and fears. As the Brew crew struggled to contain the mimetic outbreak, Mira threw herself into finding a way to counter it. She delved deep into the Confederation's data vaults, seeking any scrap of information that might hold the key to the virus's undoing. And there, in the depths of a top-secret research file, she found it, a name, half-buried amid a flood of esoteric data. Ilara Voss, a Confederation scientist who had worked on the mimetic virus project before mysteriously vanishing years before. Mira knew she had to find this Ilara Voss, wherever she was. For she held the key not only to stopping the mimetic virus, but perhaps to the rebellion's very survival. But as she raced to unravel the mystery, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. For even as the Brew crew fought to liberate the galaxy from the Confederation's grasp, dark forces were moving in the shadows, forces that had their own designs for the future of humankind. And at their center was a figure cloaked in mystery, a puppet master pulling strings on a galactic scale. Their name was whispered only in the darkest corners of the mesh, a name that struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest rebels, Blackwood. As the rebellion hurtled towards its climax, Mira, Finn, and their allies would find themselves drawn into a web of intrigue and betrayal, where the lines between friend and foe blurred and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But for now, as Mira huddled over her console, her eyes straining to decipher the secrets of the mimetic virus, all that mattered was the fight. The fight for freedom, for justice, and for the right to choose one's own path among the stars. And in that fight, Mira knew, there could be no surrender. For the price of failure was a galaxy forever shackled in the chains of alien tyranny, and that was a price she would never be willing to pay. As Mira raced to unravel the secrets of the mimetic virus, the Confederation's grasp on the galaxy was slipping. Chaos reigned supreme as rebellions flared like solar storms across 100 worlds. At the heart of this maelstrom was the Sol system, birthplace of humanity and the shining jewel in the Confederation's crown. For generations, the system's colonies had chafed under alien rule, their resentment simmering like a star on the brink of nova. Now, with the fires of rebellion spreading across the galaxy, that resentment had finally ignited into open defiance. On Mars, the domed cities of Olympus Mons and Valles Marineris became crucibles of insurgency, their citizens rising up against the Confederation garrison in a blaze of makeshift weapons and desperate courage. In the floating cloud cities of Venus, rebel hackers waged a shadow war against the planet's heavily fortified data hubs, seeking to sever the Confederation's grip on the system's communications. But it was in the moons of Jupiter that the uprising found its most unlikely champion. Captain Anaya Gupta was a child of the Jovian colonies, born and raised in the sprawling city-stations that orbited the gas giant. She had grown up on tales of Earth's ancient heroes, of brave men and women who had fought and died for the cause of freedom. And now, with the Confederation's rule crumbling around her, she saw a chance to write her own chapter in that storied history. As commander of the ISS Kingfisher, a battered old corvette with more heart than firepower, Aya had spent years running blockades and skirmishing with Confederation patrols, keeping the spark of resistance alive in the Jovian moons. Now, with the rebellion in full swing, she saw a chance to strike a blow that would be felt across the galaxy. Her target was Io Station, the heavily fortified Confederation outpost that served as the linchpin of their control over the Jovian system. Ringed with gun emplacements and shielded by the latest in alien technology, the station was considered unassailable by conventional means. But Aya had a plan, one that hinged on the unique properties of Io itself. The moon was a seething mass of volcanic activity, its surface pockmarked with sulfurous geysers and lava flows. And it was this same geological tumult that the Kingfisher's crew would use to their advantage. In a daring raid, Aya and her hand-picked team of infiltrators slipped past the station's defenses in a stealth landing craft, touching down in the heart of one of Io's most active volcanic regions. With the skill born of years of guerrilla warfare, they planted a series of high-yield explosives around the area's main magma chamber, rigging them to detonate on a remote signal. Then, with the trap set, Aya made her move. The Kingfisher came screaming out of the void, all guns blazing as it bore down on Io Station. The Confederation defenders, caught off guard by the sudden attack, scrambled to mount a defense. But even as they brought their weapons to bear, Aya triggered the explosives on Io's surface. The results were cataclysmic. The magma chamber ruptured, sending a geyser of molten rock and superheated gases boiling up from the moon's core. The plume engulfed Io Station, bypassing its shields and eating through its reinforced hull like acid through paper. In moments, the once mighty outpost was reduced to a molten slag, its garrison consumed by the fires of Io's fury. And as the Kingfisher soared triumphant through the debris field, Aya knew that the blow they had struck would resound across the galaxy. News of the Io Station's destruction spread like wildfire, sparking fresh uprisings on a dozen worlds. In the Jovian system, rebel cells took to the streets in open celebration, hailing Aya and her crew as heroes of the revolution. But even as the rebels savored their victory, the Confederation was mounting its response. The alien overlords, their grip on the Sol system slipping, lashed out with all the might of their vast war machine. Fleets of warships poured into Jovian space, their guns trained on the rebel-held moons. In the face of this onslaught, the rebels fought with the courage of the desperate, their jury-rigged ships and weapons pitted against the full might of the Confederation. Aya and the Kingfisher were at the forefront of this desperate defense, rallying the ragtag rebel fleet in a series of daring hit-and-run attacks. But even the bravest of hearts could not hold out forever against such overwhelming odds. One by one, the rebel ships fell, torn apart by the relentless barrage of Confederation fire. The Kingfisher, its hull pitted with scars and its crew exhausted, made a final, defiant stand, buying time for the remaining rebels to scatter and regroup. In the end, it was not enough. The Confederation, their forces battered but unbroken, tightened their grip on the Jovian moons, ruthlessly crushing any remaining pockets of resistance. Aya and the surviving members of her crew fled into the depths of space, seeking refuge among the far-flung rebel outposts. But even in defeat, the fires of rebellion still smoldered. For the memory of Io Station's fall had seared itself into the hearts of the oppressed, a symbol of defiance that could never be extinguished. And in the shadows, new leaders emerged, ready to take up the fight where Aya had left off. On a dozen worlds, rebel cells gathered in secret, whispering of new schemes and desperate hopes. In the shipyards of the outer colonies, makeshift warships took shape, their crews determined to strike back against the hated Confederation. And in the depths of space, a battered corvette limped towards a distant outpost, its crew battered but unbroken. For Aya and the Kingfisher still had a part to play in the great drama unfolding across the stars. The rebellion had suffered a blow, but it was far from beaten. For as long as a single human heart still beat free, the fight would go on. And in that fight, the name of Anaya Gupta would forever be remembered, a rallying cry for all those who dared to dream of a galaxy unchained. The grind. In the wake of the Jovian uprising, the galaxy teetered on the brink of all-out war. The Confederation, its authority challenged like never before, marshaled its forces for a decisive counteroffensive. Across 1,000 worlds, alien fleets mustered, their gleaming hulls bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to cinders. At the tip of this spear was the Epsilon Eridani system, a strategic linchpin that had long been a bulwark of human resistance. Here, amid the swirling clouds of gas and dust, a ragtag fleet of rebel ships gathered, bracing for the storm that was to come. Their leader was Admiral Jenna Solarian, a veteran commander who had cut her teeth in the unforgiving depths of the Kuiper Belt. Hers was a face etched with the lines of hard-fought battles and harder choices, a visage that inspired equal parts fear and reverence among her crews. Under Solarian's command, the rebel fleet had become a thorn in the Confederation's side, striking at supply lines and harrying alien patrols across a dozen sectors. But now, as the full might of the Confederation bore down upon them, even she felt the first stirrings of doubt. For a raid against the rebels was a force unlike any they had faced before, a grand armada of Confederation ships, led by the dreadnought TFS Magellan. A behemoth of steel and alien composites, the Magellan dwarfed even the largest of the rebel vessels, its guns capable of reducing a moon to molten slag. As the two fleets closed on each other amid the swirling eddies of Epsilon Eridani's stellar winds, Solarian knew that this battle would be the crucible in which the fate of the rebellion would be forged. Win here, and they would buy precious time for Mira and the Brew crew to unravel the secrets of the mimetic virus. Lose, and the flame of human defiance might be snuffed out forever. The first salvo came from the Magellan, a lance of pure energy that speared one of the rebel frigates clean through, splitting it like an overripe fruit. In an instant, a third of Solarian's screen was gone, reduced to a cloud of expanding plasma. But the rebels weren't defenseless. Even as the Confederation ships pressed their attack, the human vessels responded with a fusillade of their own, missiles, mass drivers, and esoteric alien weapons scavenged from 100 battlefields. The void lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns as the two fleets clashed, the elegant dance of ship-to-ship combat dissolving into a brutal slugging match at knife-fight ranges. The rebel ships, outgunned and outclassed, pressed in close to their alien adversaries, trading armor and lives for the chance to strike a telling blow. At the heart of this maelstrom was Solarian's flagship, the TFS Endeavour. A heavy cruiser of human make, the Endeavour was a ship forged in the crucible of a dozen campaigns, its hull scarred with the memories of hard-fought victories and bitter defeats. Now, as the battle raged around it, the Endeavour plunged into the heart of the Confederation line, its guns blazing as it dueled with the Magellan itself. The two ships circled each other like ancient sea beasts, trading titanic blows that sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of spacetime. On the Endeavour's bridge, Solarian gritted her teeth as another salvo from the Magellan rocked the ship, sending sparks cascading from overloaded consoles. Around her, her crew fought with the desperate fury of the damned, coaxing every last erg of power from the ship's straining reactors. "Keep firing!" Solarian roared over the din of battle. "We have to hold them here, no matter the cost." And hold they did, even as the rebel fleet was whittled away ship by ship, the survivors fighting on with the grim determination of those who knew they were all that stood between their comrades and annihilation. In the end, it was not enough. The Magellan, its armor pitted and scarred but its spirit unbroken, delivered the killing blow, a lance of concentrated fire that pierced the Endeavor's reactor core. Solarian, her face lit by the hellish glow of her dying ship, gave the order to abandon with a heavy heart. As escape pods spilled from the Endeavor's belly like seeds from a burst pod, she whispered a silent prayer for the fallen, and for the rebels who now fled before the Confederation's wrath. Among the stars of Epsilon Eridani, the Confederation had triumphed. But even as the alien ships consolidated their hold on the system, bombarding the rebel bastions into submission, the embers of defiance still glowed amid the ashes. For the rebels had bought their comrades' precious time to regroup, to heal, and to plan anew. And in the shadowed corners of a dozen worlds, the whispers began anew, whispers of the Brew crew, and of the secret that could break the Confederation's hold on the galaxy forever. The battle for Epsilon Eridani was over. But the war, the true war, fought in the hearts and minds of the oppressed, had only just begun. And in that war, there could be no surrender, and no quarter asked or given. The dark times had come. But in the darkness, the flame of rebellion still burned, a beacon of hope for all those who dared to dream of a galaxy reborn. In the depths of the Confederation's most secret research facility, four figures huddled in the shadows, their faces lit by the eerie glow of a stolen data slab. They were an unlikely quartet, a barista, a hacker, an anthropologist, and a starship captain, united by a shared purpose and an unbreakable bond of comradeship. Zoe, Finn, Mira, and Aya had come far since their humble beginnings, from the backwater colonies of Earth to the very heart of the alien empire that had held humanity in thrall for generations. Each had played their part in the great drama that had unfolded across the stars, from Zoe's fateful act of defiance to Aya's daring raids against the Confederation's Jovian strongholds. Now, as the rebellion teetered on the brink of defeat, they had come together for one final, desperate gambit, a strike at the very heart of the Confederation's power, aimed at the secret that had eluded them for so long. The mimetic virus, Mira whispered, her eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. If we can find a way to counter it, to turn it against the Confederation itself. Finn nodded, his fingers flying across the data slab's interface. I've been analyzing the code Mira recovered from the Confederation's data vaults. It's like nothing I've ever seen before, a true work of genius, and of madness. Aya frowned, her battle-scarred features creased with worry. But can we control it? The risk is worth it, Zoe finished, her voice ringing with the same steel that had first inspired a galaxy to rebellion. We've come too far to turn back now. This is our chance to strike a blow that will be felt across the stars. And so, in the heart of the enemy's citadel, the four rebels set to work, their minds and hearts united in a single, unwavering purpose. Finn, his genius honed by a lifetime of hacking and invention, delved deep into the virus's labyrinthine code, seeking the key that would unlock its secrets. Mira, drawing on her unparalleled knowledge of alien cultures and psychologies, worked to unravel the complex web of mimetic triggers and cultural biases that gave the virus its insidious power. Aya and Zoe, their skills honed in the crucible of battle, stood watch over their comrades, their weapons at the ready and their eyes sharp for any sign of discovery. They were the shield and the sword of the rebellion, the guardians of the fragile hope that had brought them to this fateful moment. Hours turned to days as the four rebels labored in secret, sustained by little more than determination and the occasional furtive sip of precious, hoarded coffee. But even as they struggled against exhaustion and despair, they knew that they were racing against a ticking clock. For in the skies above a dozen worlds, the Confederation's fleets were gathering, poised to deliver the killing blow to the battered rebel forces. Only the success of Mira and Finn's desperate gambit stood between the rebellion and annihilation. And then, in a moment of blinding insight, it all came together. The key to the virus's undoing, the secret that had eluded them for so long, lay not in its code or its cultural triggers, but in the very nature of the human spirit itself. For the virus, for all its insidious power, was a thing of rigid control and conformity, a tool of oppression that sought to strip away all that made humanity unique and vital. But the rebels, in their very defiance of that control, had already planted the seeds of the virus's undoing. In coffee shops and cantinas across the galaxy, in the quiet moments between battles and the shared laughter of comrades in arms, the rebels had nurtured a culture of their own, a culture of diversity and individualism, of creativity and hope in the face of overwhelming odds. And it was that culture, Mira realized, that held the key to the virus's defeat. Working feverishly, the four rebels crafted a new strain of the virus, a mimetic counteragent that would spread not conformity, but creativity, not fear, but hope. They poured into it all the defiant spirit of the rebellion, all the dreams and aspirations of a galaxy yearning to be free. And then, with a final, triumphant keystroke, they unleashed it upon the unsuspecting Confederation. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across 1,000 worlds, the Confederation's carefully crafted networks of control and indoctrination began to unravel, as the rebel virus spread like wildfire through their systems. Soldiers and bureaucrats alike staggered as the mimetic chains that had held them in thrall for so long shattered, replaced by a flood of new ideas and possibilities. In the heart of the Confederation's capital, the alien overlords watched in horror as their empire crumbled around them, their once invincible war machine grinding to a halt as confusion and chaos spread through their ranks. And in that moment of weakness, the rebels struck. From hidden bases and secret shipyards, 1,000 ships took flight, their hulls emblazoned with the sigils of a dozen free worlds. At their head flew the Kingfisher, the battered old corvette that had once been Aya's pride and joy, now reborn as the flagship of a free galaxy. The battle that followed was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, a clash not just of fleets and armies, but of ideas and ideals. The Confederation, their once proud warriors reduced to babbling confusion by the rebel virus, fought with the desperate fury of a wounded beast. But against the fire of the rebel onslaught, they could not stand. One by one, the alien strongholds fell, their defenders scattering before the rebel advance. And on 100 worlds, the people rose up as one to throw off the yoke of their alien overlords, their hearts alight with the fire of newfound freedom. In the end, it was over almost before it had begun. The Confederation, its power broken and its leaders scattered, sued for peace, the once mighty alien empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. And as the guns fell silent and the smoke of battle cleared, a new age dawned over the galaxy, an age of freedom and possibility, where species once divided by the Confederation's iron fist now stood shoulder to shoulder as equals. At the heart of this brave new era stood Zoe, Finn, Mira, and Aya, the unlikely heroes who had sparked a revolution and changed the course of galactic history. They were the leaders of a new order, the architects of a future where the only limit was the reach of one's dreams. And in the years that followed, as that future blossomed and grew, the galaxy would remember their names, and the humble drink that had started it all. For in coffee shops and cantinas from Earth to the farthest reaches of the void, beings of every species now gathered to share a cup of that precious brew, and to remember the day that coffee saved the galaxy. For the rebellion had been more than a fight for freedom, it had been a revolution of the spirit, a testament to the unquenchable fire that burns in the heart of all sentient life. And though the road ahead would be long and hard, the galaxy knew that it would never walk that road alone.